Hello, my name is Alexandra, and I am the author of Beijing Opera Costumes, the visual communication of character and culture, which I present for your consideration for the PQ Best Publication Award in Performance Design and Scenography. The book you are now reviewing is the second edition, published in February of 2019 by Routledge. It has been expanded with 100 more color photographs, which enhance the historical precedents from imperial dress and provide more details of the embroidery and headdresses. The synopsis supplied informs you what the book is about, and now I would like to share with you how it came about. My interest in Chinese opera began when I received a Fulbright appointment to teach costume courses at the National Institute for the Arts, now Taipei National University for the Arts in Taipei, Taiwan, for academic year 1990 to 91. After attending performances of Chinese opera there, I became enthralled by the complete transformation of the actors through their costumes and makeup. I inquired about the style with one of my teaching colleagues who was a devotee of this traditional performance, and she replied, "The goal of the costumes is to communicate the roles to the audience." As a costume designer, this simple revelation resonated with my own approach to the design process. I was intrigued to learn more about how this simple commonality translated between the costumes of Chinese traditional Jingju, capital drama, known in the West as Peking or Beijing opera, and the Euro-American theatrical conventions of my training. During my initial readings of books in English, I uncovered the seminal writings of A.C. Scott, a Western scholar of Chinese theater beginning in the 1950s, who was using his expertise to explicate and export this performance style to global audiences. In his book, Chinese Costume in Transition, he stated, "To treat stage costume in any detail would require a book in itself." While he and other authors writing about Chinese opera at that time were remarking the significance of the costumes in this performance style, their level of inquiry was limited to basic descriptors. They were not addressing the queries that a costumer would want to ask. Here was where I found my mission. Though an outsider in Chinese culture, my viewpoint and foundation as a costume designer researcher would bring a new perspective to this conversation. I could supply the answers to questions costumers would ask and balance the text with history, theory, aesthetics, and practice, creating an all-inclusive book for designers and makers. Over the course of the next 2 decades, I immersed myself in uncovering the many threads of culture and aesthetics that make up the images of Jingju on stage. I approached my research in the same way that I would prepare for designing costumes for a performance, by studying historical and cultural context, the history of dress, the concomitant art forms, and the performance style. To this end, I arranged for residencies and tutorials at the National Academy for Chinese Theater Arts, the only university-level training in Jingju in China and a center for the style. Here, I studied with their teachers in these subjects and examined the precepts and theories of the system of standardized costume, as well as the practical aspects of dressing, applying makeup, hairstyling, and storage. I procured additional residencies at University of Hawaii, Manoa, the foremost department for the study of Jingju in the English-speaking world, where I was able to observe their preparations for performance and create the pattern drafts from their stock of authentic costumes. My field research was generously supported by the United States Institute for Theater Technology and the University of Oregon. During the initial periods of absorption, I read in detail about the roles referred to by my colleague and how every character on stage is classified according to the character's important personality traits and circumstances in the story. The role types are further distinguished by performance skills in singing, movement, and acrobatics, and precepts of age and dignity. While still early in my process, trying to find a place to land in the complexity of Jingju costumes and their context, I thought I had made a brilliant discovery of a link between Chinese and Western theater. Yet the role types mentioned above became a measure of how not to proceed with my research. Having studied European theater history, I was well familiar with the stock characters of Commedia dell'arte and how each performer learns to play a fixed type of character. The stock characters in Commedia are intended to be stereotypes and are limited in their personality range. The role types of Jingju, however, do not imply this narrow focus, for they are defined by what the characters in each category have in common, while also accommodating a variety of dispositions. The evolutions of these two performance styles are unrelated, as is the execution of these characters in performance. This critical lesson led me to use caution in the construction of the rest of my study. Rather than seeking a relation to something with which I was already familiar, respecting cultural uniqueness was my responsibility to build into my understanding of this performance style. Presenting the information acquired also involved developing a suitable translation for expressing the changeable nature of costume within a conventionalized dress of this traditional performance form. While the framework of the costumes is based on patterns of dress from the imperial and theatrical past, there is a balance between historical method and theatrical execution, with fluidity and flexibility playing a part in the process. I learned to shape my descriptions to allow for this mutability of choice, preference, and variable circumstances in the company, the story, and the characters. Rather than absolute statements of fact, my descriptors of the costumes were regularly tempered with qualifiers such as generally, typically, sometimes, usually, often, tend to, and so on. The issue of gender was also a factor in describing the clothing differences among the role types, as the gender of the performance is not always the same as the gender of the character, and it is important to point out the differences in the costumes for male and female role types. Therefore, I endeavored to link the gender of the costumes to the roles of the characters consistently, writing about costumes for male characters or female roles, while allowing for non-gender specifics for the performer within. To return to my starting point of trying to understand the parallels and distinctions between Western and traditional Chinese costumes, I was startled to discover that as a traditional performance art, Jingju costumes has developed without the benefit of the role of a dedicated costume designer. While Western performances today typically have a costume designer who designs specific costumes for each character in every production, Jingju costumes have become conventionalized, and the same stock of costumes managed by well-trained wardrobe personnel works for all performances regardless of genre, location, or era. Despite these very distinct processes, both forms still share the goal to communicate the role to the audience through costume. From my perspective as an outsider, I've been able to convey these insights and fresh connections to the conversation about and collected knowledge of Jingju costumes, while also preserving the art form at this particular moment in time. Even a traditional performance style evolves, and current Chinese costume designers are experimenting with ways to enter the realm of conventionalized costume and fuse them with interpretations. Chen Wenbao, for example, is now applying ink brush painting to the surface of costumes for greater expression of the emotions of the individual characters. His designs are not a replacement, rather a complementary addition to the conventions that will expand and carry on the original intentions of the costumes of this performance style. My scholarship in this subject and the impact of my book have been recognized by professors, museums, and institutions globally. I've been invited to speak at the Denver Art Museum and the University of Michigan. Professor David Ralston from the University of Michigan stated, "This is the only book of its kind in English, and it is very hard to conceive of it being surpassed anytime soon." Professor Elizabeth Wickman-Walczak from University of Hawaii, Manoa remarked, "My remarkable book is possibly the most extensive study of Jingju costume in any language, and by far the most complete coverage of the subject in English." In her foreword to my book, Professor Susan Su expressed, "There have been few books in English that have tackled the subject as comprehensively as this volume. It is the most scholarly and complete English language study of the form to date. I appreciate Bond's awareness of the importance of serious research when one is representing another culture on stage." I have also consulted and contributed to 2 European exhibition catalogs, On Stage, The Art of Beijing Opera at the Museum of Culture in Basel, and Jingju, Chinese Theater Costumes in the Collection Pelloni in Italy. Now you are invited to enter my world of Jingju costumes with brilliant colors, lavish silks, intricate embroidery, and glittering embellishment, an opulent and unforgettable depiction of Chinese culture on stage. Thank you.